Welcome back to Nuclear News. The whole purpose of this show is to prove and back up the claim that uranium stocks can make a move like this again. Back in 2003, price of Paladin was 15 cents. By 2007, the price of Paladin was $85. It could be argued that the fundamentals are way better now than they were back then. And so the fundamentals are what we stay on top of in this show because they could have life-changing implications. If uranium miners could make a move like this the last time there were even whispers of a nuclear renaissance, well, what happens now when people are screaming about a nuclear renaissance from the rooftops? And by the way, this is what the chart of Paladin looked like right before it went from 10 cents to $85. There was a massive crash from $1.38 down to 10 cents, and from 10 cents, it literally skyrocketed straight up to $85. Now, why are uranium stocks falling massively in the last few days? This is why. The Fed meeting recap, Powell says central bank to be cautious on rate cuts, rocking market. Dow tanks by 1,100 points, post first 10-day losing streak since 1974. So obviously uranium stocks are not going to go up in that environment. And obviously, they're going to collapse in this type of broad macro-based sell-off. Now, what is the playbook? Federal Reserve spooks markets. President gets upset. President says something to pressure the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates. Market gets very excited and markets rally, right? Because the market at the end of the day is begging the Federal Reserve for interest rate cuts. That's what the real estate industry needs. That's what almost every small business needs. And so we've seen the story before. Short-term selling because there's a concern rates won't fall fast enough. And so what do politicians do every single time? They say what they have to say to pump markets. What they have to say is we're going to get rates lower faster. Now, yes, there might be an inflation scare at some point further along down the line in 2025, but for now, wait for that massive move, that short squeeze move, and when Donald Trump gooses markets higher. That's short-term price action. What about long-term fundamentals? That's really what matters. That's really what drives life-changing returns in the long run. Well, one of the biggest stories now is that the biggest companies on the planet are investing heavily into nuclear because it's needed to power AI. Canadian engineering firm Atkins Realis has been selected by Energy Northwest to build X Energy's SMR, small modular reactors in Washington State, for the Amazon nuclear-powered data center rollout. Lots to unpack there. Obviously massive that Amazon.com, a multi-trillion-dollar company, is building out a fleet of nuclear reactors, but it's also very good for Atkins Realis Group, which is a publicly traded company and which is skyrocketing all that news. So the nuclear economy is getting bigger and bigger. All the different companies that are ancillary to it are starting to benefit from it. Obviously massive for this company to essentially be contracted to build Amazon's nuclear fleet. Amazon's New Year surprise, a $1 billion bet on nuclear power. Amazon is anchor investor in a $500 million investment into X Energy, a private developer of small nuclear plants that's worth $1 billion. Will be very interesting if X Energy ever goes public. This may make Amazon the majority shareholder in its own pet nuclear power company. We are still in the very early stages of nuclear renaissance. So all short-term price action is noise. Uranium is the new oil, and it's needed to power nuclear energy. Obviously, we've been covering that it's in a multi-decade supply crunch. Be a nuclear family. DC households may choose clean nuclear energy with America's first ever nuclear-powered consumer energy plan from Constellation. As public support for nuclear power grows, Washington, D.C. residents can show their pride in going nuclear as part of the pilot market for the new program. Washington, D.C. families can now buy 100% nuclear electricity from local Constellation reactors. So it's not just the biggest companies on the planet doing this. Individual families can choose to go all nuclear. Again, we're so early. Think about the future when it's the only viable choice because of how cost effective it is. U.S. oil giant CEO is a fan of this nuclear energy technology and thinks there could be a role for a company like ours. That's Chevron CEO Mike Wirth saying he's a fan of small modular nuclear reactors. So what happens when these multi-$100 billion oil companies start investing in small modular reactor technology as well? It is the future. France demands nuclear-friendly replacement for renewable energy directive. One of the biggest stories we've covered over the last few years is that nuclear energy has been accepted into the green energy fold, meaning some of the wealthiest countries on the planet, like France, Great Britain, the United States, can now invest trillions of dollars into nuclear energy instead of just solar power and wind farm. And clearly, the direction is into nuclear because it's 100 times better than those. Meta, the parent company of Facebook and Instagram, sees $10 billion AI data center in Louisiana using combo of clean energy and nuclear power. Japan sees nuclear as cheapest baseload power source in 2040. Japan's next energy plan will not minimize nuclear energy. The plan has always been to focus purely on renewables and minimize the amount of nuclear energy capacity. What happens when that starts to become maximized? That's what we're talking about. So just insane demand growth for nuclear power. The elephant in the room is uranium being in a multi-decade supply crunch and being needed to power these massive fleets of nuclear reactors. So we know there's massive demand. What's going on with the supply? Russia sells out of vast Kazakh uranium deposits to China. So China fully understands the assignment to stack as much uranium as possible, as cheap as possible. The United States, as we've been covering, understands that as well. So they've been trying to incentivize domestic production of uranium. And so something else we've been covering, which is super important, is that 2024 is the last year that these big nuclear utilities, these big power plants, have secondary supplies of uranium in their inventories. All the experts agree that 2025 is the year that that falls like a rock, and there's going to have to be a whole lot of contracting. So we know why uranium miners have fallen in the short term, purely macro driven. We know why they haven't been skyrocketing that much given all these booming fundamentals, because there's been plenty of commercial inventories on the books of the nuclear power plants that need uranium. Next year, that all changes.